Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Rising. Got a great show planned for you as always. Kim Iversen is back with us, bright and early from California. How are you feeling, Kim?
I'm feeling okay. I still have COVID. Luckily, I can work remotely as I always do. So, no one around me is going to be infected. But I've been down with COVID for the last week. I got it last Wednesday. My fiance's had it. He's like 5 days ahead of me on this whole thing. So, I'm feeling pretty good now. I had like one bad day, I will say, where I was in bed and high fever. And then after that, I was feeling okay with COVID. But I lost my sense of taste and smell today. This morning, I woke up. I cannot taste my coffee. So that's kind of a bummer.
Well, we are very glad you're doing better and glad that you're with us. So we want to get into the news today. We've got some rather serious stories. So yesterday, the country saw actually two tragic shootings. The first was a mass shooting at a grocery store, and that was on Saturday in Buffalo, New York, that left 10 people dead. The suspect allegedly wrote a manifesto about his plans to specifically attack black people and cited the Great Replacement theory. However, a senior law enforcement official told NBC that they were working to verify the document's authenticity. Now, the Great Replacement theory is a kind of like conspiracy theory idea that non-white individuals are going to replace white people to vote in a specific political agenda or destroy white values in Western civilization through interracial marriage, immigration, and violence. Now, among the 13 victims who were shot, 11 were black and then 2 were white.
Yeah, the suspect, 18-year-old Peyton Gendron, allegedly researched what time of the day Tops grocery store would be busiest and then targeted the store over its mostly black demographic. Like so many tragedies before this isn't the first time the suspect has been involved in violent attacks. The shooting at Tops comes a year after Gendron made threats against his own high school, and a group of people gathered around Tops Market Sunday afternoon to mourn the victims. Just really, really, really tragic. Yeah. And even more tragic that there were signs that this guy was a crazed mass shooter in the making, threatening his school, and yet they really couldn't. Obviously, you can't hold people until they commit crimes. You can't just hold them because you think they're going to commit crimes. So, it's a really tricky situation. What could they have done? I certainly made sure he didn't get any guns.
Yeah,
somehow.
It is a tricky situation, but I got to tell you, it is frustrating when we learn this about this alleged shooter, that he had threatened a school, the Parkland shooter. Like this, it was obvious that he was a mass shooter in the making, that he had threatened family members, he'd threatened the school, he had been referred to law enforcement, the FBI was onto him. They didn't do anything. And now maybe they're going to say, right, we have civil liberties. You and I think civil liberties are extremely important. The FBI, the police can't just arrest people or hold people indefinitely without reason. So I do get that, but I guess my frustration is they're always saying, this is why we need more resources, and we need people to be really vigilant and to speak up and to, see something, say something. It's like, okay, but people always do see something. They always do say something, and you still are not able to prevent this stuff. So maybe we just have to be, I'm unwilling to give up additional liberties or to pay more money to law enforcement or do any of that when time after time they fail. Like, I don't believe that they're going to be able to stop these things. And maybe we just need to be honest about that.
Well, I think they need to first research more how he got the guns. I've heard early reports that he got them from his parents, but that's not verified. I don't know if we have really any solid evidence yet as to, how he got the weapons.
But
parents,
that would be don't give your antisocial, crazed teenager a gun, please. That's stop doing that.
Especially if they threatened the school and there was actually action on that threat. They actually picked him up and took him to a for mental evaluation because of that threat. So, I mean, if there is a threat to that level of seriousness, especially, I think it's definitely, how did he get the weapons? That's got to be, I think, the number one question. And in this case, the parents might end up being held liable for this shooting.
Yeah, and that is tricky as well, but I think probably there ought to be some kind of liability on the part of the parents for if you bring weapons into a home with a clearly unstable individual. That's because the signs were there. People saw the signs. People spoke up. That's what frustrates me. But we're always told, be vigilant, watch, see if there's a bag left unattended, report it, do all those things, be a good citizen. People are good citizens. They do those things, but it falls through the cracks when it comes to law enforcement, which really frustrates me. Well, so President Biden commented on the tragedy yesterday. Let's watch that.
We're still gathering the facts, but already the Justice Department has stated publicly that it is investigating the matter as a hate crime, racially motivated act of white supremacy and violent extremism. As they do, we must all work together to address the hate that remains a stain on the soul of America. The hearts are heavy once again, but a resolve must never ever waver.
Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called for social media platforms to address and track down extremists on their platform after it came to light that Gendron allegedly mounted a camera to his helmet and live streamed the shooting on Twitch. Now, Twitch said it took down the footage within the first 2 minutes, which is actually pretty impressive, I think, of being able to identify that there was something they don't want to be showing and taking it down. So in this case, I think it's a lot of deflection to blame social media or whatever, right? There's evidence that he was radical. He said he was radicalized, if you can take his manifesto seriously, just from searching online about the Great Replacement or whatever. But it's not. I don't think Twitch did anything uniquely irresponsibly. In fact, I mean, and this is kind of weird, but this was a thought I had. If there's a mass shooter and they're live streaming the attack, there is a scenario in which both law enforcement or victims or people who are hiding would rather have access to that live stream than not have it, so they could avoid the shooter. But it's probably a niche case. But anyway,
I think that's actually a really good point. I would prefer to know where he's located. Right. Yeah, I mean, in his manifesto, alleged manifesto, we don't know if he was actually the author of it, but he says 4chan, he was radicalized on 4chan. He did upload this manifesto onto Google Drive, so as a Google document. So I don't know if, is Nancy Pelosi now suggesting that Google sweep through our Google Docs and check to see if there's any sort of extremism that might be, because he uploaded this allegedly 2 days prior to the shooting on Thursday. So, but this does kind of take us down that path again of, okay, how do you identify an extremist in advance? And then when you do identify them, another question is, what do you do about it? You cannot, once again, put people in prison until they actually commit crimes. We're not Minority Report. You can't just say, well, we think you're going to commit a crime, so therefore, we're going to lock you away. You're guilty. I mean, what do we do?
Right. And even the Great Replacement stuff, it's a political viewpoint. It's a view about something that's happening in the world. I don't agree with it. And then obviously, and whether you agree with it or not, then taking it and committing violence because of it is absolutely wrong. And I don't agree with the theory itself either. But it is a political viewpoint. I mean, I was actually reflecting on how Texas has this new social media law that was defended successfully in court last week to prevent this. So this is a Republican law to prevent political viewpoint-based discrimination or censorship on the platform. And one of the reasons I think that gets difficult and confusing is, well, what counts as a political viewpoint? I mean, this guy's views are political viewpoints. They're crazy political viewpoints, but I think probably under the social media law, it would have been the platforms can't even take down something like that.
Yeah. Well, did you see Rolling Stone's tweet? I think we have this one. Speaking of political viewpoints, they were claiming that the shooter is a mainstream Republican.
Right.
Right. This is that's the viewpoint that he's a mainstream.
It is,
yeah. The Buffalo shooter isn't a lone wolf. He's a mainstream Republican.
Is the congressional baseball game shooter a mainstream Democrat then? I mean, we can just play this game forever, right?
Not only that, but I mean, he's not this shooter wasn't Republican at all. Reading his manifesto, I mean, I don't know. He's 18. He's young. I don't know if he knows much about anything politically, considering his manifesto is all over the place. But he says that he was a communist for the last several years. Since he was 12 and got politically active. That he was like an anarcho-communist, and then has moved now to a green nationalist, nationalist, fascist, socialist, green, eco-fascist. I mean, just weird political ideology, but certainly not coming from He condemns conservatism, says that that's equal to corporatism. He doesn't want anything to do with it. He also condemned leftism. He's like all over the place, but certainly not under any stretch of any imagination a mainstream Republican. But, that's, I guess, where some of these outlets want to.
And that's something I've noticed from doing research on sort of like alt-right type people who become violent, is it seemed to me from trying to understand the evolution of their ideas that, it's just like you said, it's, well, they find something really radical and then they get sick of that because then it doesn't become exciting enough and they have to find something else that's radical. Like there's a certain subset of alienated, confused, psychotic young people, usually young men, who, would be a communist one day, a fascist the next. They would join ISIS if the opportunity came along. Like, it's just looking for the next crazy thing to try to derive meaning from. And because those ideologies are never actually sources of meaning because they're crazy, then they have to get more radicalized. They have to find something else to keep almost like keep the high going, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. But later in the day, we did have another shooting happen that broke out here where I am in California. It was in Orange County in Laguna Woods when a man opened fire and left one dead and wounded 5 senior citizens before being stopped. The suspect is an Asian man in his 60s and was in custody when police arrived.
Churchgoers detained him and hogtied his legs with an extension cord and confiscated at least 2 weapons from him. He was detained when the deputies arrived. That group of churchgoers displayed what we believe is exceptional heroism and bravery in intervening to stop the suspect. They undoubtedly prevented additional injuries and fatalities.
Yeah, apparently they hogtied the guy. So he goes in there, and the churchgoers, the senior citizens, actually detained him themselves, hogtied him, and waited for the police to show up. Just incredible.
Good for them.
This was
amazing.
It was a predominantly Taiwanese church. What we know about this man is he's also Asian. Not sure if he's also Taiwanese, if he has any sort of connection to the church at all, or if he's a member of their community, or, it's really unclear what happened in that situation.
Not all violence. In fact, the vast majority of violence is not committed for ideological reasons or political reasons or race or something else. It's, people kill their neighbors, they kill their coworkers, they kill their family members, which is absolutely terrible. There's way too much violence in this country, but the media gets very interested in, violence that fits a certain pattern. We want to know the manifesto. We want to know what their views are. And sometimes that's important to do, as it is in the case of the former shooting, but it's not always the case.
Even if they do have, like the kid with the manifesto in Buffalo, even if they do have something like that, the bottom line is these people are nuts. He's crazy, clearly crazy. And so was this man who goes into a church and decides to shoot it up. You have to have, no matter what your ideology is, you have to have a level of insanity that goes along with it that then gets you to pull the trigger like this. So, I think that's another thing that people need to remember, and don't get lost on this, thinking that there's this enormous threat coming from, mainstream Republican America, according to Rolling Stone, that, suddenly we have to fear all of these mainstream Republicans because they have the ability to pull a trigger and kill us in a mass shooting. That's not accurate. The reality is these people are nuts. The people that do this, they're crazy. Absolutely. And it's, and that's not an excuse. That's not like, we need to figure out the mental health crisis in America, or, this is just, we have to at least recognize it so that we know who we potentially should keep from potentially, committing an act like this.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, my radar is up next, so stick around for that.